Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ethos Online. Again, this is a space where we can be, belong, and become the very best version of ourselves. So, wherever you're joining us today, again, whether that be Idaho, Florida, Alabama, Indiana, wherever it is, we just want to say welcome. And again, thank you for joining us in this journey. Here at Ethos, we spend a lot of time researching. We look at every word, we look at all these different rabbinical interpretations. We ask questions of who is the audience, right? What was the intention of the writing in the first place? Is it literal? Is it metaphorical? We ask all of those questions because, again, this is an ancient text. And so if we take it responsibly, if we ask the deeper questions of it and we get great answers from it, then we can begin to apply it to today. And so that's the hard work that we do every single week. We spend a lot of time, a lot of energy so that we can find something beautiful from the beautiful messages of Israel, right? And so once we understand that, application becomes a lot of fun. And so today, again, I want to remind you, we are delving into the book of Genesis. And we are more than halfway done, which is a surprise because, again, it's been almost 2 years, right? But this kind of work is so much fun for me because at the end of it, when we finish Genesis, to be able to look back and say, look, we took a book of the Bible, we took it seriously. We did what the rabbis did. Right? We took time, energy, and we gave it the space so that it could breathe. And so Genesis, we've been moving through it, and we always start with a reminder. Genesis was not written as a history book, right? Again, the context of it was that they were taken captive by the Babylonians 587 BC. And when they are captives in Babylon, basically prisoners, they are trying to hold on to what it means to be a Jew. Right? A Hebrew. And so they're keeping all of their traditions, all of the campfire stories, all of their rituals. They want to hold on to that. They don't want to assimilate. They don't want to take on Babylonian gods. They don't want to do the Babylonian traditions. They want to stay monotheistic as opposed to polytheistic, many gods. They want to stay Jewish, right? Keep it kosher. And so this is why they write and compile all of these stories. All of these messages, all of the poetry, it's all so that they don't assimilate. They keep Hebrew kosher. And so every single time that you're reading through this book, especially Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, I want to remind you, Israel sees themselves in every story. Whether that is the story of Moses, whether it's the story of Adam, Eve, whatever it is, every single time you read it, I want you to remember it's not just a story about Adam and Eve, it's a story about Israel, right? The Adam and Eve story, it's not a story about literally how everything was created. That was not the intention. The idea was, hey, what happens when we don't allow wisdom to guide the knowledge that we consume? Well, chaos. Brokenness, relationship is severed. The divine is no longer remembered. That's the idea here. Israel sees themselves in the story of Adam and Eve, just like Israel sees themselves in the story of Moses, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Israel is in every single one of the stories. Good, right? So again, great reminder before we begin. We're going to finish chapter 37. And so we're reading about Joseph, and it's been so much fun. I've already got a couple letters from some of you saying this one's going to be exciting. You can already kind of feel it. We're nearing the end, and so you're kind of excited. Where are we going with this? I hope you're as excited as I am. It gets really, really good. So, reminder with the story of Joseph. Again, Joseph, it's not just a story about a kid with a cool coat, right? It's not just some interesting story about like love and family disruption and this and that. It's bigger than that. It's the story of Israel, the highs and the lows. What do we do when we're in the middle of captivity? What do we do when we feel like God has forgotten us? These are the themes of the story of Joseph. Right? What happens when we just feel like, can anything else go wrong? It went wrong. These are the themes that we find in Israel here in the story of Joseph. So reminder again, highs and lows, how the divine shows up. So let's read together. We're going to go through 23 through 36 and finish off chapter 37. So I'll read it to you first, and then we'll do what we always do. We will do the interpretations. We'll look at words, phrases. We'll look at different rabbinical interpretations all throughout the ages, and we'll find meaning, and then we'll connect it to how to relate it to us today. So here we go. Verse 23, we'll start with. Now it came to pass, when Joseph came to his brothers, that they stripped Joseph of his shirt, of the fine woolen coat which was upon him. Verse 24, and they took him and they cast him into the pit. Now the pit was empty, there was no water in it. And they sat down to eat a meal. Again, imagine this. He's down there in the pit and they're just eating a meal, right? And they lifted their eyes and saw, and behold, a caravan of Ishmaelites was coming from Gilead. And their camels were carrying spices, balm, and lotus, going to take it down to Egypt. Egypt shows up again, right? Egypt. And Judas said to his brothers, what is the gain if we slay our brother and cover up his blood? Right? What's there to gain? What do we get from this? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites. But our hand shall not be upon him, for he is our brother, our flesh. And his brothers hearkened. Then Midianite men, merchants, passed by, and they pulled and lifted Joseph from the pit. And they sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 silver pieces. Then they brought Joseph to Egypt. And Reuben returned to the pit. And behold, Joseph was not in the pit. And he rent his garments, right? He ripped his garments. He was so mad. And he returned to his brothers and said, the boy's gone. And where will I go? And they took Joseph's coat and they slaughtered a goat, and they dipped the coat in the blood. And they sent the fine woolen coat, and they brought it to their father, and they said, we have found this. Now recognize whether it is your son's coat or not, right? Is this Joseph's coat or not? Tell us. What do you think, Dad? He recognized it, and he said, it is my son's coat. A wild beast has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn up. And Jacob rent his garments, and he put sackcloth on his loins, and he mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and all his daughters arose to console him, but he refused. Excuse me. He refused, for he said, because I will descend on account of my son as a mourner to the grave. And his father wept for him. I have a tickle in my throat. This should be a fun one today. And the Midianites sold him to Egypt, to Potiphar, Pharaoh's chamberlain, chief of the slaughterers. Okay. So we got some studying to do, right? We've got a lot of verses. So here we go. Verse 23. Notice this. They stripped Joseph of his shirt, of the fine woolen coat. So again, the word stripped here, it actually means they tore it from him. They rip it from him. It wasn't just all right, arms up, and they pull it off. No, they rip it from him. It's torn. And so the idea here, the Hebraic idea, is they are stripping Joseph of his identity, right? They're making it so that he is no longer special. Even bigger meaning here, he is no longer part of the family. Yeah, you are no longer an Israelite. You're no longer a Hebrew. And so remember this, tribalism is everything. And if you lose your tribe, you have nothing, right? You're just a nomad. And so Joseph here is essentially a nobody now, right? Joseph is stripped, thrown into the pit. There's a deeper meaning here, right? Identity gone. He is experiencing this metaphorical death. He is in the pit. And so remember, heroic stories, there's always a moment where heroes, especially biblical, right? In biblical stories, the hero, before they can rise, before they have the aha moment, before they can experience resurrection, they're going to have moments where their identity is stripped away, where their identity is basically non-existent. They go down to the pit. Rabbi Ben Malachi, he says this, Jacob dies the death Israel died during captivity. Interesting, right? So he's referring to, actually, I should say Joseph. Joseph dies the death Israel died during captivity. When stripped of pride, humility has time to take root, making Israel stronger if our nation allows it. if our nation allows it. So fix there, Joseph, my bad typo. Joseph is this reminder, look, Israel's gone through moments, right? Israel's experienced the death of many deaths, right? They continue to essentially these larger beastly empires. They come in, they swallow them whole. They go into this death. They experience in a moment where their identity is almost taken. And so the question is, are they going to arise stronger, or are they going to be a nation that just loses their identity, just like all the other nations? What's going to happen to them when they go down into the pit? Right? And so again, we've experienced all these different moments. Biblically, we have many moments with pits, right? Whether you're Benaiah, one of David's mighty men who goes down into the pit, fights the leopard in the snow. Whether you're Daniel in the pit with the lions, so many moments, right? The pit, the moment where the hero goes down, and they're going to experience a resurrection later on. It is the Joseph Campbell hero's journey. Right? It's the moment where, again, the divine is gonna chip away, right? These moments where brokenness happens, trials happen, but what does the hero do? Right? And for Israel, the hero will continue to get up, will continue to experience resurrection after resurrection, right? This is the deeper idea. I love this picture here. It kind of, when I started thinking about my own life, my own applications, I started to think about an origami crane. Yeah, weird, right? But if you look at this picture, I loved it when I saw it. I just typed in Google origami crane mishaps because I have a story. I was doing speeches with my students, and I asked them, show me a how-to speech. And one of my students said, Mr. Warfel, do you know how to make an origami crane? And I said, I am terrible at making origami stuff. I get lost in the directions. And so my students said, I will teach you. And they kind of took it upon themselves and said, I'm going to be the one that teaches you, Mr. Warfel. And so here's the thing. I want my students to feel like they nailed it. But I know if they go up and do the speech, I'm probably going to get lost. And I don't want them to feel like they're a failure if I blow it. Right? And I already was setting myself up for failure. Negative self-talk, I get it. But here's what I did. I went on YouTube and I started trying to make these origami cranes. I wanted to at least have an idea of how to do it so that I didn't become a hindrance to their speech. And so I started practicing these things for a couple days. And I'll tell you, my desk was filled with misshapen cranes. They looked rough. And so I spent 2 to 3 days just trying to make origami cranes. And you could see this evolution of cranes from it looked like raptor here. It looked like interesting boulder here. But eventually, I started to make cranes, these origami cranes. And what's fascinating about this for me is that over and over again in the hero's journey, we have these moments, these trials, these brokenness, these moments of the pits, right? We hit the pits. We make the misshapen origami. But here's the beauty. We look back later, and sometimes it's years later, and we say, I see the evolution of how I got here, right? I see the evolution of it started here and it went here and here and here. And that's the idea here with the story of Joseph. He's not going to be aware of it yet, but this pit is one of the first of many trials he's going to go through. And he does not lose faith in the divine. He does not lose faith in the promise that he's going to make it, that his family's going to preserve. Right? And so this is the deeper idea here. This is going to be one of many steps in this crane process, right? Many steps in this journey for Israel where they're going to look back and say, we went through Egypt. We went through Babylon. We went through Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, the Holocaust, right? We've been through it all. We are a people, a resilient people. And we have made it through, and we can do it again. This is the beauty of this story here. And it starts with the first real trial here, the pit, right? And those moments, again, when you strip them away, when you look back, it creates something really beautiful. And so this is kind of the beginning of this story of Joseph. And I love that it starts with a pit. Notice this, the word here, pit, even the word in verse 24, the word pit here, it actually means death in the Hebrew. And so the idea death, it's almost like this Jonah moment, right? Jonah goes down to Sheol, right? They call it Sheol in that moment. Not hell, right? But it actually just means death. That's the idea. Hell is not some place down in the bottom of the ocean. The idea here is death. It's he experiences a death, and soon he experiences a resurrection. Joseph is going to experience a resurrection. He's going to be resurrected from the pit. So let's keep going. Verse 24. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. So thinking of last week, we talked about this. The pit is going to bear no blessing, right? There's no water in the pit. There should be water. It's an empty pit. It's an empty well. There is no water. So again, Israel, you're going to be in these moments where you are in the pit, right? It feels like there's absolutely no blessing when you are in the middle of captivity, right? When you are in the middle of the thing that's breaking you down, how could there be a blessing? But the idea here is that the pit itself becomes the blessing because it's going to get you to Egypt. It's going to get you to the place where you become the blessing. You are the blessing. The pit is the thing that's going to help you strip away all the things, right? Until you realize the blessing was always here. That's the idea, the pit. So we'll keep going. Verse 25. And so they sit down, they have their meal, and it says, behold, a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, and their camels were carrying spices, balm, and lotus. So who are the Ishmaelites? Basically, their old family, right? Ishmael, the son of Abraham, he's picked up, by this older tribe. But notice this. I love this concept here. Notice that they are carrying spices, balm, lotus. Interesting. Yeah, we also have Jesus later on. He's going to have very similar frankincense, gold, and myrrh. We're going to have very interesting similarities here. Yes, you can draw on those. Yes, you could also draw on Queen Bathsheba, all of those things. These writers are borrowing from past writings. And this is kind of where the beginning of that concept of bearing three gifts actually starts. But we'll keep going here. Lotus, balm, spices. Why is this interesting? Well, here it is. Rabbi, I can't even say his name, Mekilta Beshalach, we'll say that. He says this, and I found this really fascinating. He said, it is customary for Arabs to carry only coal and tar. So ancient tribal Arab people whose odor was foul. But for this one, Joseph, it was arranged that they should be carrying spices so that he should not be afflicted by foul odor. Joseph is to begin reconciliation even while being paraded to his new place of captivity. I thought that was an interesting commentary there. And this one comes from, this would have been first century interpretation of this text, so around the time of Jesus. So the metaphor here is pretty interesting. Joseph stripped of everything, right? And yet healing, restoration has already begun when he's pulled out of the pit, right? From his captors. It comes in someone they used to call family. Right? It's coming from Arab people that no longer are connected to them, but there's this foreshadowing to Egypt, right? The blessing's going to take place. There's going to be something beautiful that's going to happen. Even though, friends, we know Egypt is the beastly empire, it's going to be Egypt that's going to bring the blessings, right? Normally, Egypt would smell foul. Do you guys kind of see the idea here? Normally, Egypt would be beastly, but in this story, friends, foreshadowing, Egypt is going to carry blessing. Do you see it? It's brilliant. It's actually really brilliant storytelling. So here we go. Verse 26. What is it? So they start talking this over. What is it if we slay our brother and cover up his blood? So notice this. They aren't actually concerned with preserving life. And this is kind of a sad moment in the Hebrew story here. They're only looking for a moment to benefit from this. And so this same rabbi says this about this moment. The great sin of Joseph's brother was not their jealousy, but their blind greed that enabled them to do such terrible evil. That one kind of hit me a little bit. Greed, right? Greed can cause ridiculously bad downfalls, whether it's, again, politicians selling out to lobbyists, money laundering places, to Ukraine, Russia, whatever place you want to take it, pretending to care about innocent people while they get hurt, greed causing corporations to misuse land, pump out products they don't care about. All of that greed can lead to some really terrible things. And so even in this story, Israel's reminded, look, if greed is our motivating factor, we end up in some pretty messed up places, right? We actually end up selling our own brothers and sisters. And this is happening between the north and the south, right? Israel and Judah. Yeah, they're actually selling, right? They're actually taking each other captive and then selling to other empires. This is gross, right? When greed takes place, we sell our brothers. This could not have been a heavier moment for Israel to read this. This is what they were thinking when they read this moment, where Joseph's brothers are basically selling him. This is very relevant to them at that moment. We'll keep going. Verse 27, come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites. But our hand shall not be upon him, for he's our brother, our flesh. And his brothers hearkened. Again, on the surface, seems very virtuous, right? Truth is, they're basically just paying someone to do the evil they want to do, right? That's the idea here. They are letting greed lead the way. Verse 28, they sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 silver pieces. So this one's an interesting one for me. You will see often in Torah and even beyond these moments where silver pieces are exchanged. And so I did a little bit of studying. I started looking into where else do we see silver, because I feel like we've seen this before, right? And I think some of you already know where I'm going. Pieces of silver. First off, notice this. Exodus 21. If the bull gores a male or female slave, the owner must pay 30 shekels of silver to the master of the slave, and the bull is to be stoned to death. So again, a slave's value was about 30 pieces of silver. Think about this. How much are they getting for Joseph? Less than a slave. Yeah. As an Israelite, when you're reading this, you are understanding something really heavy here. The brothers, because of their greed, because of their hate, because of their jealousy, they no longer see their brother as even a slave. They don't even see him as human anymore. He is less than a slave's value. Terrible, right? Less than a slave's value. We know this one, the pieces of silver. Matthew 27, we think of Jesus, we think of this moment, right? When the morning was come, all the chief priests and elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. Then, of course, Judas, right, the piece of silver, when he saw that he was condemned, repented himself and brought again the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned and that I have betrayed the innocent blood. And he cast down the pieces of silver in the temple and departed and went and hung himself, right? The idea here, betrayal, right? And now you understand too, when you hear the 30 pieces, understand they were basically saying someone who followed Jesus, right? Someone who was close to him. Judas saw Jesus as a slave. Yeah, this is a really difficult thing to swallow here when you understand the silver and the exchange of it, and it's Joseph is essentially his worth. We're being told his brothers don't see any worth in him at all, right? There's betrayal, there's slavery, there's all those elements, loss of identity in the silver exchange. Really pretty heavy moment, right? And so anyone reading that would have picked up on that immediately. Let's keep going. 28, notice this. They brought Joseph to Egypt, right? Egypt, the place of captivity, the place of slavery, the place where you become a machine in the cog, the place where you forget that you're human. So now notice this. If you haven't heard anything else, pick this up. Israel, what will happen to you when you go into captivity? Will you forget your humanness? Will you become just another slave, another machine, another cog in Egypt's wheel, right? What will happen to you? Will you hold on to what it means to be human? Which is, again, the idea of Sabbath, the reminder, this is the blessing, the beauty of humanity. right? This is what it means to be human, to be free, to be alive, to not just be working to the bone. And so, Joseph, when you go to Egypt, will you retain your kindness, your love, right? Will you retain the things that the beautiful elements of what it means to be human? Or will you just become another slave? Israel, will you become just another slave? This is how Israel's seen themselves in this story. And this is why, again, the story of Joseph, so palatable, so beautiful, right? It's a big challenge. What will you do when you're in Egypt, Israel? Verse 29. And Reuben returned to the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit, so he rent his garments. Basically, commentators say at this moment, he strikes himself. Levi ben Rausch, he says this: the lesson of Reuben and his near save of his brother is one we must all learn from. When given the chance to do good, we must do good the moment the opportunity presents itself, lest we fall in line with those who victimize others. I love this idea here. If you have the opportunity, and this is again a more modern translation, obviously, if you have the opportunity to do something good, do it, right? If you have the opportunity, don't wait, right? You never know when that opportunity might slip away. And so the idea here, again, that Rabbi Levi ben Rausch says, take the opportunity. Don't wait. It's the Reuben moment, right? Reuben could have stood up for his brother. He could have done the right thing, but he waited and he missed his opportunity. And again, I think how that is so applicable, right? So applicable. Verse 30, the boy is gone, and where will I go? There's an interesting translation here to this one. Basically, where can I go for my father's pain? That's the idea here. I've caused this pain. Where can I go to escape it now? Right? I've done this terrible thing. I cannot escape the consequences now. They're going to follow me. He realizes my father's going to be hurt. It's going to hurt the rest of the family. This thing is going to snowball. Where can I go to escape the consequences of this? Nowhere. It's that moment where you've made the mistake. You can't hide from it. It's going to follow you. That's what he's saying. He's rending his clothes. He's saying, I've done the terrible thing. I should have stood up. I should have done the right thing, and I didn't. Right? It's kind of heart-wrenching for Reuben. Verse 31, and they took Joseph's coat, and they slaughtered a kid, and they dipped the coat in the blood. Again, a goat, right? This is an interesting moment. The brothers knew the story was going to stick, right? This idea of the blood. They need the scapegoat, right? They need something, something to pull in and say, look, it was a mountain lion. It was something, right? They need to put it on something. And I started thinking about this in this moment with Joseph, the scapegoat mechanism, the blood, right? There needs to be blood. We can't just say we did this thing. We have to put it on something else. And so something has to be blamed, right? Something has to be blamed. We simply can't take the burden of our own actions on ourselves. We have to put it on something else. And so the wild mountain lion did it, right? This is the scapegoat mechanism. The evil Jews did it. The libtards, the MAGA people, they're at fault. The unvaccinated, the homosexuals, fill in the blank here. Right? We scapegoat because we often feel the need to deflect the issue on something else, right? Put the anger on something or someone else. And again, I find this really interesting, this idea that they needed to have blood, right? They needed to show blood. They needed something. But here's the problem with the scapegoat mechanism. It's always been the problem. I think of Jesus on the cross, right? One of the most brilliant moments in the Bible. Because the problem with the scapegoat mechanism that Reuben finds out, right? Finds out fast, is that it creates victims. They're so angry. They're so frustrated. They got to put it on something. They put it on Joseph. And then they, of course, need the blood and they put it on the lion. They do all these things. It continues to create victims. It goes somewhere. And so the deep message when I think of Jesus because the story of Joseph has a whole lot of similarities to the story of Jesus. I think you would agree with that. The idea here of the cross is this. The scapegoat mechanism, it does not bring peace, does it? It creates more violence and it creates more victims. And so when we have to keep putting our anger, our violence, our rage, all the jealousy, when we put it on something else, good people get hurt. We create victims and it never really satisfies, does it? Yeah, the brothers are not satisfied. They actually are going to feel worse. Reuben is not satisfied. Father's not satisfied. It creates more victims, the scapegoat mechanism. Let's keep going. Verse 32, and they sent the fine woolen coat and they brought it to their father and they said, we have found this. Now recognize whether it's your son's coat or not. So again, notice this. Once that mechanism kicks in, lie after lie, it continues a downward spiral. This whole thing continues to build. It can't just be one lie now, it's got to be more. It can't just be one act of violence. It continues to build more and more and more. People are satisfied for only a short time, and then we need the next thing, right? We need the next lie to keep that last lie. It keeps building. Verse 34, and Jacob rent his garments, and he put sackcloth on his loins, and he mourned for his son many days. And all of his sons and all of his daughters arose to console him. In this moment for me, I was struck by this. And I've read this story many, many times. I was struck by this simple idea here. The Hebrews, they understood mourning, death, right? When you lose someone, there is a process. And notice this for the Hebrew people. The process, you never did this in isolation. The process was meant to be done in community, right? Whether it was celebration or loss, the Hebrew people understood we have to do this in community. And I started thinking about our own culture right now, right? I think so many of us today, we pretty much do almost everything in isolation, don't we? We're very isolated people in our culture today. The reality is we were not meant to live isolated lives, though. We weren't meant to grieve by ourselves. We're not meant to deal with different issues by ourselves. We're meant to do it in community. Because when we do, we find connection. We find strength. When we do it in isolation, it's a hard road, isn't it? And so we were meant to be in community because that's where we thrive most. And so I love this idea here. The daughters and the sons, they rise to console him. The unfortunate thing is, again, Jacob doesn't allow them to console him, which is why the whole story, Jacob is mourning the entire story. Interesting, again, ideas of how to mourn, right? We'll continue. And the Midianites sold him to Egypt, to Potiphar, Pharaoh's chamberlain, chief of the slaughterers, right? That's how we're going to end this chapter. Ha! He's sold to the chief of all slaughterers. He is sold to one of the most vicious men in Egypt, right? You are wanting to turn that page. For parents here, anyone listening right now, you're laughing because this is what we do to our kids, don't we? When we're reading those chapter books, we'll stop there, won't we? What's going to happen to Joseph next? Yeah, so good. What happens? Again, the idea here, the journey of Egypt begins now. More trials for Joseph, more chances for victories, more opportunities for growth. The hero is going to go through this journey. They're going to become stronger at the end. It's going to be beautiful. What a fun chapter. And again, we've really only started the story of Joseph. But I hope you enjoyed some of these moments that I was able to bring out. Really kind of beautiful, a lot of depth here. And again, we've just started it. You're going to find as we go through this story, it really, really hums. There's so many interesting connections to past and then future stories that rely on this story and kind of borrow from it. You'll see all of that as we move through it in the weeks to come. But how do we take it home? Here's one thing that connected with me and kind of how I thought I could apply this to my own life. And so I wanted to share that with you. How do we learn from mistakes from the past? That one connected with me when I started to think about the origami swans, these moments where I have scapegoated others. I started thinking about all of those things. How do I learn from those moments? Right? As the origami pieces are set up in front of me, how do I learn from them? Well, number one, I'm learning myself to acknowledge mistakes. I'm learning to acknowledge that they happen. So when I make a mistake, I try to admit it as soon as I can. So if there's an apology that needs to happen, I can make those apologies, right? I can do that immediately. Making an effort to apologize for a mistake can show that we actually respect people. We want to be in community with people. Acknowledge the mistake. Then you're no longer pretending it's not there. You're not pretending like you're perfect. You don't have to pretend any of that. You can just say, man, I blew it. I made the mistake. That's something I'm learning. Number two, analyze it. So when I make the mistake, after I've acknowledged it, after I've accepted that it's been done, analyzing it, looking at it, think about what caused the mistake, right? Analyze my understanding of how to shift, okay, I could have done it a little differently there. Ooh, ego really took a big part in this decision, and I think that's where I started to go the wrong way. You analyze the mistake. You take time because you want to avoid making it again, right? People who continue to make the same mistakes, what a painful life. But if we learn to analyze those things, look at where we went wrong, look what we could have done differently, that's where we begin to grow as individuals. So I'm learning to analyze those things. Not over-analyzing them, of course. I don't want to lose sleep, but just taking intentional time to do so. Number three, get feedback. Having mentors, people I respect in my life, I'm learning asking for constructive criticism is way better than just getting these offhand comments from people you're not close to, right? If I can ask for constructive criticism from people I respect, I can take that wisdom and I can learn to grow after I've analyzed the thing myself, right? I can learn to say, okay, that's really good advice. I didn't think about that. From an outside perspective, ooh, that's good. Right? Or, ooh, that hurts. Or maybe it's just not good criticism. I don't know. But asking for it is going to be a big part of it. Number four, find some lessons. This one's I think where it takes some maturity, and I'm growing into this thing. A key to learning of finding mistakes is saying, look, maybe the mistake taught me a lesson here. Maybe sometimes I need to slow down. Maybe sometimes before I jump into an idea, I need to fully think about the thing, right? Maybe before speaking, I need to think about my words. Whatever the thing is, what lesson can you bring from it, right? There are oftentimes lessons that we can learn, and we can actually put those two words. Sometimes we write them down. We say, this is the lesson of year 2021, August for me, whatever it was. Being a pastor of a church, this is some of the lessons I learned. Doing that is so, so helpful. And then lastly, share what you learned. I think this is one of my favorite ones. Don't share before the lesson's learned, though, right? Make sure you've done the process before you start sharing. I think it's very easy to be, especially if you are a pastor or you're leading a corporation, a store, you're a manager, whatever it is, make sure you've done the hard work before you start sharing these ideas. And I'm learning this as well. I can't tell you how many times I had great ideas pulled from different books, and then I realized later, I'm not doing that thing, right? Make sure you're doing the thing. And then after you've done it, after you've done the hard work, after you've gone through the process, when you can share these ideas, it's actually far more meaningful, far more palatable. There's depth, there's roots to it. You can bring up actual stories because it happened to you. You went through it. And then when you share it, you enable others to begin making or not making the same mistakes you did. Share that wisdom. I hope you enjoy this, folks. This was a lot of fun for me. I absolutely love the story of Joseph. It is one of my favorites in the Bible. And so join me in the next couple of weeks as we move through the stories of Joseph. I really think you're going to enjoy this one. So as we always do, please remember, go to ethos-church.org/donate. We are a tax-deductible organization. We rely on your donations to continue functioning. We do so much work, and so please consider joining us. Giving those donations really does help continue basically what we do every single week. And so some of the other things, Ethos living rooms, joining us, having actual conversations, live discussion groups. We love these ideas. We want to continue boosting this. Please consider going there. And as always, hit that subscribe button. Go to our YouTube page. Let's build this thing together. Everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. And hey, I coughed a lot less. Yeah, we got through that. That was a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next week when we delve into the next chapter, chapter 38. Take care. See you next week.